Northern France, autumn, 1917. The war had eaten the countryside until nothing was left but bones. What once had been a noble estate, a grand stone chateau with sweeping halls and gold-trimmed windows, now stood half-collapsed on a hill overlooking the scarred fields. Roof tiles were gone. The upper floors were ripped open to the sky. Shattered beams hung like broken ribs. And inside that ruined shell worked the men who were forbidden to exist. They were the listeners. The invisible soldiers. The wireless section. Their orders were simple. Intercept every German signal. Decode everything. Speak of nothing. Private Alain Morel arrived just before dawn, boot-soaked, uniform stiff with dried mud. He had expected trenches, rifles, marching drills, but not this. The chateau was quiet. Too quiet. A sign hung on the broken doorway. No light at night. Silence during operations. Alain hesitated. A voice inside snapped. Close the door. You're letting out the heat, what little we have. He stepped inside. Oil lanterns glowed dimly. Wires crisscrossed the room like spider webs. Tables were buried in papers, cipher sheets, maps, and listening logs. A bulky wireless transmitter sat in the corner, its copper coils humming softly. 3 men looked up from their work. Sergeant Etienne Roche, the stern-faced leader with permanent dark circles under his eyes. Corporal Viard, thin, sharp-featured, tapping his foot with nervous energy. Operator Henri Marcal, the oldest, calmest, a man with hands steady enough to stop a war if only he had the right code. Sergeant Roche spoke first. You're late. Alain swallowed. My escort was shelled near Saint Laurent. Roads were. Everything's shelled near Saint Laurent, Roche cut in. You're here now. Sit. He pointed to an empty stool beside the backup receiver. As Alain settled in, the room hummed with quiet purpose. Henri tightened the headset around his ears, adjusting dials until the static sharpened into a faint, rhythmic tapping. Morse. German. Weak. But real. Roche motioned for silence. Henri's pencil began to move, smoothly transcribing the signal onto a log sheet. The room held its breath. Then Henri paused. Frowned. Tapped the headset. That's strange. Roche leaned in. What is? Henri replayed a section of the taps. They repeated the same coordinate twice. Viard snorted. Probably a drunk operator. Happens all the time. But Henri shook his head. No. This isn't sloppiness. Listen, the timing is identical. Same pace. Same spacing. Like a pattern. Alain asked quietly. Is it a code? Henri didn't answer. Instead, he kept listening. And then the signal stopped. Cut cleanly. Not faded. Not lost. Just gone. The room sat in tense silence. Roche scribbled a note into the operations log. Intercept recorded. Classification, non-standard. He looked at Alain. You'll learn something here, private. Nothing at this station is ever as it seems. As the sun pushed pale light through the shattered windows, Roche finally explained the truth. The Germans triangulate radio waves. If they detect our signals, we have 2 minutes, maybe less, before artillery hits this hill. Alain felt his stomach twist. So we're broadcasting from a broken chateau on purpose. Roche smirked. The Germans won't shell what they think is already dead. Viard added. unless we make a mistake. That night, rain hammered the broken roof. Wind whistled through the exposed beams like distant howls. At 1:06, exactly the same time the Germans transmitted the night before, a static sharpened. Henri jerked upright. Same frequency. Alain felt chills crawl down his arms. Henri scribbled again. Dot, dot. Dot, dot, dot. Repeated. Perfect timing. Roche whispered. That's no accident. This time, instead of cutting abruptly, the signal shifted to a lower pitch, then a higher one, before dissolving into pure white noise. Henri removed the headset slowly. They're trying to tell someone something. But they're not finishing the message. Alain asked. Or they can't? The lantern flickered. Rain pounded harder. Roche closed the operations log. Tomorrow, we change frequencies. If they follow us, then this isn't random. As the men prepared to sleep, Alain lingered by the window, staring into the dark countryside. Lightning flashed. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the distance, a flicker of light in a farm ruin across the field. Or maybe it was nothing. But the chateau groaned in the wind, as if the building itself carried a warning. Those who listen too closely may hear things meant to stay silent. Dawn came slowly over the war-scarred countryside, grey and reluctant, as if even the sun feared what hid beneath the fog. The chateau creaked in the cold, its stones damp, its broken roof dripping steady rhythms like a clock ticking down. Inside, the men of the wireless section gathered again around their sets. None of them had slept. Not truly. Not after the second signal. At 6:40, Sergeant Roche adjusted the tuning coils, shifting all receivers to a frequency the Germans should not know. A protected band. Rarely used. Quiet as a grave. Roche crossed his arms. If we hear anything here, we report it to headquarters immediately. Henri nodded, tightening the headset. His hands, normally steady, shook just a little. Alain settled beside him, listening to the steady hiss of static. Minutes turned to an hour. The fog outside thickened like wet wool. Nothing. Then, at precisely 7:06, the static trembled. A faint tapping emerged. Slow. Measured. Dot, dot. Dot, dot, dot. Viard's cigarette fell from his lips. Henri froze. Roche whispered. Impossible. Alain whispered back. They followed us. And then, for the first time, the signal changed. A faint voice, stretched thin and distorted, slipped between the taps. Barely audible. Male. Panicked. Henri tore off the headset as if burned. Roche grabbed it and pressed it to his own ear. His eyes widened. Someone's whispering behind the transmission. Viard backed away, hands trembling. That's not possible, Sarge. Morse doesn't carry voices. It can't. But it was there. A muffled breath. A low murmur. A broken syllable. Alain leaned closer. What's he saying? Roche removed the headset slowly, face pale. I don't know. But it's French. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Smothering. Henri swallowed hard. What if it's a trapped unit? One of ours? Viard scoffed, but uneasily. And they're tapping Morse perfectly? At the exact same hour 2 nights in a row? On a frequency they shouldn't even know we're using. Henri replied quietly. Maybe they're signaling, because they can't speak. Roche looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Henri tapped the log sheet. The repetition. The precision. The timestamp. It's not desperation. It's a routine. A schedule. Alain felt dread tighten his chest. Like they're waiting for someone. Roche whispered. Or obeying an order. The lantern flickered. Another groan echoed through the chateau walls, long, low, as though the stones themselves exhaled. Roche unlocked a small iron box under the main desk. Inside were sealed envelopes, coded reports from HQ that were for officers only. He sorted through them until he found the one marked Wireless Intercept Anomalies, IPERS Sector. Roche broke the seal. The others waited, breath tight. His eye scanned the page. Then he set it down, jaw clenched. What does it say? Alain asked. Roche's voice was barely above a whisper. The Germans reported the same signal 3 nights ago. Silence. They thought it was us. They tried tracing it, but the source keeps moving. Henri leaned forward. Moving? Yes, Roche said. Every time they triangulated the signal, it came from a different direction. Sometimes kilometers apart. Alain felt a chill run down his spine. So it isn't from a unit, he whispered. It isn't from any station. Henri finished the sentence no one wanted to say. It's coming from nowhere. At noon, fog rolled down the valley like smoke. Viad stepped outside to smoke, grumbling under his breath. Seconds later, he burst back in. Someone's outside. Roche rushed to the doorway. Alain followed. Across the field, barely visible through the fog, a lone figure stood on the ridge. Still. Silent. Watching the chateau. Alain whispered. Is he German? Roche didn't answer. The figure didn't move. Didn't wave. Didn't shout. He only lifted his arm slowly. With something in his hand. A metal object. A rectangular box. Henri stepped forward. That's a field transmitter. The figure turned. Walked back into the fog. Vanished. Roche whispered. Everyone inside. Now. The moment they stepped in, the wireless receiver came alive. Dot, dot. Dot, dot, dot. The exact pattern. Same timing. Same rhythm. Same message. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind the taps was the faint, unmistakable sound of a second voice. A whisper. A warning. A single word. Run. The word hung in the room like a blade suspended by a thread. Run. Not shouted. Not panicked. Not desperate. Just. Delivered. Calm. Inevitable. Like the speaker already knew the ending. Roche ripped the headset off and slammed his fist onto the table. No one leaves this room alone, he ordered. No one. The others nodded, slow, frightened nods drenched in tension. The air felt wrong. Too still. As if even the dust was listening. Roche spread the IPERS sector map across the table. Pins marked every spot where the signal had been triangulated. It was chaos. 3 locations in Flanders. 2 inside German lines. 1 in a flooded field where no equipment could survive. Another in a ruined hamlet that had been abandoned since 1914. Alain whispered. None of this is possible. Roche didn't look up. Signals don't jump 20 kilometers in a night, Henri added. They don't cross battle lines. They don't transmit from places that don't exist anymore. Viad pointed to the hill northeast of the chateau. What about there? That's where the man was standing. Roche stared at it, Hill 46, a rise of dirt and rock with trenches carved into its spine like scars. It's a dead zone, Roche muttered. No Allied or German posts left. No wires. Nothing but shell craters. Henri swallowed. What if he wasn't using wires? At 15:22, the wireless sparked again. The coils buzzed with a low, unnatural hum, deeper, heavier, like a heartbeat vibrating through copper. Henri put on the headset. Static filled his ears. Thick. Dense. Like snow in a storm. Then. Tap. Tap. Tap tap. Tap. Tap tap tap. But this time it wasn't Morse. Not exactly. It was slower, unsteady, almost like someone was tapping the metal with trembling fingers. Henri frowned. It's not a code. Roche leaned in. What is it, then? Then he heard it. Not taps. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps echoing through the transmission line. Alain felt the hair on his arms rise. Henri whispered, almost to himself. This isn't a message. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Closer. A breath leaked through the static. Then a second one. And a third. Multiple people breathing. Soft. Uneven. As if standing very close to a microphone that shouldn't exist. Then a voice, hoarse, broken, whispered. You're late. Henri tore the headset off. Roche snapped into action. Everyone outside. Now. We sweep the grounds. The 4 men exited the chateau into the cold air. The fog had thinned, but only slightly, enough to give shape to things, not enough to reveal them fully. The barn loomed behind the building, its roof half collapsed, its doorway yawning like a broken mouth. Viad gasped. There, behind the wall. A silhouette moved. Not running. Not hiding. Standing. Watching. Henri called out. Identify yourself. The figure didn't respond. Roche lifted his rifle. Step forward with your hands up. The figure didn't obey. It simply turned. A slow, deliberate movement. Then slipped behind the far corner of the barn. Roche swore and ran to the side. Henri and Alain flanked. They reached the corner. And found nothing. The mud was undisturbed. No footprints. No drag marks. No displaced debris. As if the figure had never been there at all. Henri murmured. Could he have doubled back? No, Roche said. There's nowhere to double back to. The walls collapsed on the other side. Alain scanned the distance. Then where? Whoomp. A deep, resonant vibration rolled through the air, shaking the ground slightly. The 4 men froze. It was coming from the wireless inside the chateau. They ran back inside. The wireless set was glowing, faintly, unnaturally, as if a lantern flickered inside the metal casing. Sparks danced across the tuning coil. The room smelled like ozone and wet soil. Henri put the headset on again. And stiffened. Roche grabbed his shoulder. What do you hear? Henri whispered. Breathing. Just breathing? No. Marching. Roche frowned. Marching. Henri nodded. Boots. Dozens of boots. Not on dirt, on wood. Maybe a bridge? No, wait. His expression shifted. Confusion. Fear. They're marching in a circle. Alan stepped forward. Why a circle? Unri's face drained of color. Because the sound never moves. It keeps passing the same point again and again. Viad whispered. That's impossible. Unri's voice was hollow. Then explain why I can hear them marching past the microphone for times a minute. Rosh turned to the others. We need to disconnect the set. He reached for the cable. The moment he touched it, the marching stopped. Dead silent. Then, slowly, one more sound crept through the line. A low whisper. Close. Too close. Like someone pressing their lips against the microphone. Come up the hill. Davenport lay in the grass, the cold wind brushing across his cheek as he stared up at the evening sky. The last light of day was fading behind thick clouds, turning the world a muted steel blue. His breath came out shaky but steady. For the first time in months, he wasn't afraid. Reyes knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. Stay with me, he said, voice cracking, a mix of relief and fear layering every word. Davenport managed a faint smirk. You always did worry too much. Reyes laughed under his breath, a sound half broken. And you always did talk too much. The others formed a quiet circle around them, exhausted, wounded, but finally, free. The forest that had once felt like a cage now felt like open sky. A distant engine rumbled, a friendly patrol, answering Reyes's flare. Help was coming. Real help. Davenport blinked slowly, eyes wandering to the stars emerging overhead. You know, he whispered, I wasn't scared of dying in that camp. I was scared of dying alone. Reyes squeezed tighter. You're not alone. You're never gonna be alone again. For a moment, everything went still. No gunfire. No shouting. No orders. Just the quiet rustle of leaves and the faint hum of distant salvation. Davenport exhaled one long, peaceful breath. I made it, he whispered. Reyes felt the tension leave his friend's body, not sudden, not dramatic, just gentle, like a final handshake. His eyes slowly closed. A small, grateful smile still resting on his lips. Reyes lowered his forehead to Davenport's and let the tears come, soft and silent. You made it home, he murmured. The patrol vehicles emerged through the trees moments later, headlights washing the clearing in pale white beams. Medics rushed forward, voices echoing through the dark. But Reyes didn't move until he felt a hand on his shoulder, one of the survivors, the oldest man among them. He held on for us, the man said quietly. He held on so we could walk out of there. Reyes nodded, wiping his face. No. We held on because of him. He rose, breathing deep, steadying himself. The nightmare was over. The camp was behind them. The war was still raging. But at least one story, one friendship, had reached its final chapter. As the medics lifted Davenport's body with care and respect, Reyes looked back into the darkness of the forest. Not with fear. Not with pain. But with a promise. I'll carry it from here. And then he turned toward the lights, leading the others home.